Just prior to my grandmother's passing, she seemed really intent on making sure that all of the grandchildren were aware of their roots. But I have to admit that it wasn't until I actually went to Ireland a couple of years after she died that the connection was actually made for me. I was really intrigued by this question that I kept getting asked. How does it feel to come home? I thought, well, that's a funny thing. But eventually, I began to realize that there's a different sense of family, of history in Ireland, in fact, in Europe, in fact, in many places in the world, than there is here in North America. So there is a strong bond, a strong connection with Ireland. And so the story of my grandmother is really very intriguing, very interesting, and I think an important one. When I was 14 years old, there was a music store that opened up in Pickering Village. And part of their sales strategy was to send a flyer out with the students of the schools and then visit them at home and give them a free ear test. So, being the eldest of 6 kids, I was already in high school at this time, but this fellow came to our home with an accordion and gave each of the younger children an ear test. I was just passing by the room when this was going on. My mother invited me in, and she told me to sit down, and we did the ear test. And the fellow said that I should be taking lessons immediately. So it was really quite by accident that I started playing guitar at age 14. After one of my first lessons, I was accosted on the street by a bunch of friends. They said, "Hey Ray, you're playing guitar now? Play us a tune." I said, "Well, I don't know anything yet." And they forced me to open the guitar up and play them what I could play, which amounted to something like "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." And they all laughed. More motivation. So I practiced like mad, and within a few years had been with maybe half a dozen teachers, and at that point taught myself for the next several years. Stylistically, I suppose that what I play is a reflection of my background in the studies. There's obviously a strong classical background, and therefore I have a fairly decent fingerstyle technique, which lends itself really well to playing jazz and classical and folk and even world music, which I do play all of and really enjoy, and get called upon to contribute on other people's albums in these styles also. Also, with my world music training and background, I get an opportunity to play not only guitar, but some of the other instruments for friends and or for studio dates, whatever the case may be. The first recording that I did was by way of a longtime friend of mine, Ron Korb, flute player who also lived in Pickering Village. Several years ago, Ron was a partner with another fellow. They had their own record label, And he had written the title track for his partner's CD. And Ron had asked me to play guitar on that composition. And that relationship has continued over the years. My first serious teacher was also a composer, and he always encouraged me to write. And I would bring in pieces and he would critique them. But it wasn't until a few years back when I was traveling and many hours on the road, Ron and I would talk about things, and I became aware that it was time for me to put something out there. And so we discussed how I might go about that. It took probably about 5 years from conception to completion. There was quite a bit of writing, quite a bit of last-minute writing, as a matter of fact, on that album. The album, Alizarin Sky, it's called. So yeah, it was a lot of work, but it was worth it. The finished product is fantastic. The CD that I'm working on currently is called Westward Voyage, and it's going to trace the journey that my grandmother made at the age of 16. Actually, she celebrated her 16th birthday in the middle of the Atlantic, having come from Ireland to the United States, where she met my grandfather, who was from Ontario, and then eventually married him and moved back to Ontario, where they raised a family, and then went on to eventually make a journey back to Ireland, having gone 50 some odd years without having seen some of her siblings. And so I'm hoping to write the music based around this journey. My grandmother died a few years back. One of the last things that I remember is that she was showing me some of her diaries. And in fact, I think there might have been even some of my grandfather's diaries that she was showing me. She seemed really intent that I should see this document and that it should have meaning for me. So I think that were she around today, that she would really, really appreciate the fact that that this project is going in the direction that it is going, that it's making the kind of statement that it's making. In fact, that it's about her and about our family. Yeah, I think she would have really been pleased.